Welcome back. We now have the second speaker, Claude Rowan, plant manager, Detroit Diesel-Allison Muncie plant, who had just returned from Detroit from a continuing education Harvard program. So he's here to teach to us today, I hope, some of what he learned in Detroit last week, but actually also on the implementation of what we've been studying in this class, and that's why this is the capstone class. Welcome to our class, Claude, and please welcome Claude. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. I see you got a glare off the chrome top here. I hope that doesn't distract you any. I'd like to, first of all, acknowledge the students, both here and at home. It's quite an achievement, and I think shows a tremendous amount of dedication to spend the time over and above your daily work activities, family ties, and that sort of thing to devote the time to classes and furthering your education. We spent a good many years of our own life doing the same thing, and I recognize the sacrifices that are made in doing this. So I acknowledge you for that. I think I'd also have to acknowledge you for this marathon of dialogue that's being thrown at you these days. It takes a lot just to sit and keep your attention span going for this period of time. So with that, we'd like to talk about some of the things that are going on in industry today, recognizing that it's not universal, but there are some plants, some industries which are starting to move forward to bring the people aspect more to the forefront in the operations than ever have occurred before. We talk about participative management and really don't understand what that is. Some of us that are well into it really don't understand all the aspects of it. But I'd like to take you back a little bit in history and explain to you why the Muncie plant is involved in this, why General Motors is moving forward in this area, and some of the things that have occurred and some of the breakdowns that we have experienced by this. It became obvious to us in the early 1980s, 81 period, that the American automotive industry was reaching a very critical period in its life. We could see this expansion and intrusion of the Japanese industry into the United States in a very organized manner. We weren't the first ones they took on. They demolished the camera industry and were working well in the electronics, and then decided after their initial attempts in the 1970 period, when they brought in a number of inferior products, to fall back, regroup, and come at us again, which they did after doing a lot of homework. We recognized that if we were going to counter that type of move, that we couldn't do it with the historic management principles that we had used for years. We had been working with a number of our operations that had been in existence for 40 to 50 years. Long entrenched methods of manufacturing management, top-down authority, did not expect any questions from the people on the floor or suggestions, and those that were given were dismissed out of hand, as it were. And this was the scope of things. This was the way the job worked, and those people who gravitated up in management felt that they had earned their stripes, and they weren't going to relinquish that type of authority to anyone under them, and they held on and became really a roadblock to the whole system. When we began to concern ourselves with how do we approach participative management, we recognized that we had to do a tremendous amount of homework. We began by introducing video courses along with intensive instructor training to try to bring an appreciation to our management people of the vast resource that lays in the total plant structure of personnel. That we really receive from those people what we expect to receive. And if we expect to receive nothing, that's exactly what we get. If we treat people as machines, if we treat people as though they have no brain power, that's exactly the type of reaction you're going to get. If you tell them to run a line and don't shut it off, they'll run a line regardless of the amount of scrap they're producing or anything else. So this was a type of culture really that we're dealing with. And it's a cultural change that we're talking about when you're discussing or considering going into a participative management structure. And culture is a very hard thing to deal with. You know, you can't go out and put your hands on it. You literally swim in this culture. And you have a culture at the plant, you've got a culture in your social activities, you've got a culture at home. And you interact in all of these little circles. So we had to deal with a change in the culture of a manufacturing operation. So then we had to start taking apart the various aspects of this culture. And you find in a manufacturing operation or any type of organization that you have different cultures within that function. You know, you will have, for instance, in the Messina plant that I was in, a very rapid turnover of managers. They were there perhaps a year to 18 months. And as a consequence of that, then you have a subculture that develops that actually runs the plant. Because the manager was never there long enough to become an effective leader. So the leadership kind of migrates down then. And it is directed by those people who are strong enough to take control of it. Now the manager comes in and he starts to set about some projects or programs. And they recognize he's not going to be there very long, so they ride the wave out, and after a brief period of time he's gone, and they go back to 100% doing things the way they want to do them. In the meanwhile, while he's trying to get his own aspects of management or principles of management in there, they have been absolutely undermining his activity. Paying lip service, but not really getting the job done for him. And as a management person, you have got to be aware of these subcultures. You have got to be able to ferret them out. You've got to determine if they're a positive or negative force, because there are both aspects going there. I've been in plants where the manager's activity was a negative growth activity. Status quo, 100%. Don't rock the boat. Keep everything in-house. Don't worry about reducing costs. We just want to keep this place going. The subculture that developed then was a progressive subculture that was aimed at improving the plant's performance and came up with tremendous cost savings, improvements in the operation, better morale in the operation. And when the manager recognized that there was this subculture going, he got rid of them. And I was transferred to another plant. So subcultures can be both ways. They can be positive and negative. And if you can determine this, if you can find this out and put it to your own use then, to help you with what you're trying to do, you'll save yourselves a lot of headaches. There are these negative cultures, though, that you've got to work on. And sometimes you'll never really get them finished. You'll never really get them put to bed. It may get to the situation that in order to really do away with that subculture, you've got to retire people, or you've got to in some way neutralize them by putting them into a position that's not going to bother you. It's not going to hurt the main thrust of the organization. And that takes some tough decisions at times to do that. But it's a very necessary thing. As I say, we started with the TICE tapes on trying to get people to recognize persons for the value they are, and to try to recognize that if you expect a person to do better and you give them that responsibility and the authority to do it, that they will in fact respond to that. Now, in so doing, you're running against this culture that came up with the fellows that earned their stripes. They don't want to give up that that authority and responsibility. So it takes an intensive amount of work with these people to get them to realize that they're not demeaning themselves in any way by allowing their people to make decisions, to investing in their people the authority and the responsibility to get a job done. And that's extremely difficult. We had several false starts in this. We tried 2 or 3 manners, people to help us get through this roadblock, instructors, if you will. And we ended up then taking into a contract with a company called DeBianca and Bergman. And these people were consultants in the field of participative management. They came in and made a very in-depth survey of our operations and came back and told us that the enemy really was the staff itself and me. When we were saying the problem was out there with the foreman, they came back and said, not really. You fellas are not really dedicated to doing this yet. You're still holding on to the reins while you're telling them to go ahead and lead. You know, you can't go out and demand that people join into a participative management structure. You can't go and say, you will participate in management. You know? That's giving them a very clear signal that they don't have any choice. And if that's the case, they're not participating in that decision. So it takes a lot of patience, you know. It takes a lot of going over the ground and over the ground and trying to get people to appreciate the fact that if we're going to succeed in U.S. industry, that we cannot do it by a top-down management system. We spent at least a year working on this with individual departments and individual people, and we started to turn over some of this management control on ordering of materials and things like that, and we immediately lost $2 million. We didn't lose it in that it was gone, but we had so much material coming in the plant that people had wanted to buy for years that we went $2 million in the red. So the first thing we heard was, let's grab all this control back and take it back from those people and get it straightened out, see. Well, the thing we had to say was, no, you can't really do that. If we rush out and take all this control back, we've defeated them. And it's going to be harder to get started the second time. So we had to bring all the people back in again that were involved in these decisions and point out to them the problems that had surfaced because of their actions, and that they had ignored certain principles that we had set out for them to work by. And we had to go back and start this order cycling all over again, return material to vendors in some cases, but they were all part of those decisions. They had to go back and solve the problems that they created, because if they didn't do that, they would not really understand the problem that they created. Since that time, things have worked out very well. You know, it's taken a long time. We've been at it now for probably 3 to 4 years. And it's just starting to come about where people understand fully the impact of their decisions. We have interaction going on the production floor and in the other departments which we never expected to see, but had hoped for. There's production departments out there that have raised their efficiency 25% in 1 year by beginning to work together. You know, those folks out there, once they left the plant, became leaders in other organizations. It may be a church organization. They may be out here in the orchestra. They may be teaching classes. They're involved in United Way activities. They're involved in the various civic organizations around town, Lions clubs, presidents of this, that, and the next thing. And yet when they walk in the door, we treated them as though they didn't know anything. And now those people are having a chance to express their will in our operations. The president of General Motors visited us here just about a week ago, and we took a tour of the plant. And we had only had it set up for 2 supervisors to talk with the president. All the rest of the time he was there touring the plant, he spoke with the hourly people and projects that they had worked on and things that they had done. And I can't tell you the impression it made on him to realize the dynamics that's in the workforce and the dynamics that can be created in our corporations. People who were proud of the fact that they had made a dramatic reduction in test stand rejects. People who had contributed greatly to reducing standard labor times, and that they had cut their cost of their jobs by 10 and 20%. He was a very impressed person when he left here because of the attitude in the people. And, you know, we don't find in his discussion that he came in and said anything like, you know, what's wrong with your management staff? You know, all I heard of was a talk from your people. Because he recognized that without the cooperation of the full management staff and all of the foremen and the general foremen that are out there, that those people would not have the ability to go forward and make these presentations. And it's a total reflection on the cooperation of everyone in the plant that this is going on. You've got to be prepared, though, as I mentioned, for breakdowns, and they can occur in any fashion. And don't be afraid to fail in the things that you try. This was probably the one message we had to get across to our folks more than anything else, was don't be afraid to fail. Because nothing will be ventured if we don't start stretching ourselves and moving forward. And that holds true in your personal life or anything else. You know, if you stay in a safe little cocoon and never stretch out of that, you're never really going to succeed. And that's a message that your people have to have, that you expect them to do those things, and you do expect failure. I built a couple of tremendous machines that never earned a dime for the corporation because we could never get them to work. And I saw one of them cut up with a welder's torch. I never did see what happened to the other one, but I didn't really do the research that was necessary to make the job succeed, because I took a given set of events and assumed that they were constant, when in fact they were not. They were highly variable. So it's something that you have to do in your business life, is to be sure you understand the problems that you're working with and examine all the variables that are going to enter into it. And if you can't see them, ask somebody else to identify them for you. You know, there's nothing wrong with doing that, is to get someone to go over your numbers, even if you have to call in an outside organization, to examine the whole situation before you embark on it, to be sure that you have covered the variables, because we often get very myopic in what we're doing. And that often leads to tremendous failures. So participative management is just an ongoing evolutionary thing that is really an entire change in culture, and you may not perceive even that it's changing because you're swimming in this all the time. And you've got to turn around and look back every once in a while to take stock of where you were 6 months ago or where you were a year ago, because it's really hard to identify where you're going. We had a general supervisor who was one of our old line tough supervisors, was off for a year, and he came back about 2 weeks ago. And we didn't put him back into a functioning operation, and we asked him to get involved in something else which would just bring him in contact with people for a while. And after the second day, he came in and he said, "You know, I've been gone for a year, but I can't believe I walked into the same plant." He said, "This place is different. People are different. People are happy. People greet you when you walk down the aisle. Some of the old hard-noses that would never talk to a supervisor of any kind came up and shook his hand." You know, I had a fellow that felt that I had not done rightly by him and was very vocal about it to a lot of people. About a year later, came up and apologized. Said, "I didn't realize where you were coming from. I didn't realize just how much of the problem was mine." But he said, "I do realize that now." And he said, "I want to tell you that we'll do everything we can to straighten out the problems I've created and to go forward in this plant to make it a super place to work." But it's hard to see that when you're right in it all the time. Now, American industry has got a long way to go. We have these employee participation groups working in the plant, and those which are functioning are doing pretty well. There are some of them that are in trouble because, as Ken mentioned, a lot of the first-line supervisors still see it as a nuisance type thing. They've got a whole stack of problems of their own that they're trying to solve with machines down or whatever might happen to be, and they don't see the value in people leaving their job for an hour to go in and talk about employee participation or the projects that they're working on, which may involve just changing the lights in their department. Don't see the value in that, so they fight it. So one of the tasks that we have then as managers is to try to convince those supervisors that they have got to become part of those participation groups, and we have got to provide them the time so that they can get involved in the system. These groups are coming up with ideas that we never would have seen 2 years ago. They're coming in and suggesting that we eliminate their operation. Do away with my job. You don't really need me here. I can be doing something else. If we bring a conveyor over, if we move a machine, we can take my job right out of the picture. Or I'll do someone else's work and let him take on a different job. Now, we pay the people for these ideas. Okay, these employee participation groups are completely eligible to participate in the suggestion programs. And there have been some tremendous payoffs made to these groups. Very large savings have come out of them. And again, this is something that has got to be promoted within the plants because it gets people involved in the everyday business of the plant. We share with them our entire financial position, what our profits are, what our losses are. They have access to all of the financial data that's transmitted to Detroit. We take this into the union and discuss it with them. In the meeting we had with Mr. McDonald when he was there, we had union officials in that meeting, and we displayed up on the wall exactly the same numbers that we had been discussing with them So you recognize there's not two sets of books involved here. If the people understand how well you're doing and you're doing right by them, they'll help you get there. They'll help you succeed. If they understand how badly you're doing and what has to be accomplished and the importance of that, they will help you dig out of the hole. Because the people in industry today are beginning to realize more than ever the total threat that the Japanese are to this country, to our manufacturing base, and to the very lifeblood of this country. You know, the Japanese and other foreign manufacturers, whether it's steel or whatever it is, are exploiting the only truly free market in the world, and that's the United States. And they are systematically going to take on increment after increment of our manufacturing operations in this country until they disable us. And I firmly believe that. I've seen them doing it. In the automatic transmission business at Allison, Komatsu is in buying customers away from Detroit Allison by underselling them 40%. And from what our market studies have done of the Japanese industry and their ability to manufacture those products, it's obvious that they're selling them in at cost, if not at a loss basis, in order to capture that business. Incidentally, they copied the Allison transmission nut for bolt, so they didn't have any engineering time involved in it. But that's the type of competition they're bringing to us. Allison's involved right today trying to figure out how they can get their cost down to match that type of cost pressure. We're seeing it in lawnmowers, for heaven's sakes. So at one time, people felt pretty smug that, yeah, it was the camera industry, or yes, it's automotive. But now it's more than that. It's a total electronic industry, Silicon Valley, lawnmowers, major manufacturing, steel, plastics, videotapes. You know, you hardly can pick up an item today that is not manufactured in Japan or Taiwan or Korea. So we've got a lot to do, and we're not going to do it with the historic management structures that we have employed in the past. It absolutely cannot be done. We have got to do it with the people forces in this country, and that's the strongest thing we've got going for us. Absolutely is. You know, just another example, we used to waste every month about $15,000 to $20,000 worth of material that we bought and was never assembled into transmissions. It fell to the floor, was picked up and thrown away. So we started reviewing this with the people on the assembly lines to ask them what we could do about that. Today we're losing less than $1,000 because of that, because they found ways to put in trays to handle the material, pick up and salvage material, wash it, clean it, put it back in a job. Just more care and handling. And it's made a very significant impact. And that's an assembler on the line. Does the same thing hour after hour, day after day, but contributed a severe cost penalty by just being careless in what he was doing. So we've got to look at everything. You know, what are the secretaries doing? What are the training people doing? In our training operations alone, when we got into the Crosby Quality College work, which leads into zero defect type activity, one of the aspects that we looked at in cost of quality was the money we wasted in instructors' time when the employees did not show up for the instructor for the course. We wasted $120,000 last year by having to have the instructors come back second time or third time in order to cover the instruction. This year we have lost less than $9,000 in doing that, because we impressed on the people the importance of them being there on time, taking the course, and getting it done the first time. Now that's a significant amount of money, because it's all bottom line profit that you're looking at. That's after-tax money that we're paying out the door to these people. Just an instructor time. Care of routings on the floor, the tool routings. We're estimating that in total losses of tool routings, we lose something like $800,000 a year for misinformation on those routings. And there is a big program going forward now to be sure that those routings are accurate, that they're disseminated to the proper people, that they understand what they're reading off those routing charts, which gives them the tools and the gauges and the fixtures and everything that they should be using on their operations. It's a piece of paperwork. But if it's not accurate, it's of no value and will cost you money. Substitution of tools by the purchasing department. This came up in one of the EPG meetings. When they brought into the purchasing department who were asked to attend, the fact that the tools that they were using did not perform as well as the old tools that they used to get. And the purchasing people went back and looked at their records, and they had substituted a different manufacturer's tool that supposedly was the same quality for slightly less cost, and yet when it actually went into production, they were very inferior. And the production operator was completely frustrated at this. He was changing tools very rapidly, recognized that he was losing money, that we were wasting money. So they took it on themselves to put a case together and bring this to purchasing, and we went back to the original manufacturer again. So you have a happier operator. We've reduced our cost from this so-called cost-reduced tool, and have improved our operations again. So it doesn't matter what you're involved in. If you're in just a plain office activity, when I say plain, I don't mean in a derogatory statement, but the paperwork that you go through should be really examined. We had a purchasing activity that required handling buy cards. And the girls got to questioning, why do I have to take out a buy card and write out a form and put in place of that buy card just to keep a record that that's where it was? We went through the system and found out that what they were doing was completely unnecessary. We saved a person and a half a day in that activity. Now think about that, a person and a half a day handling thousands of these buy cards coming down, and they were making up a little duplicate slip and putting it in the file just to keep track of where it was. So we started looking at the total handling of buy cards. We found that buy cards were handled by 33 different people. And the normal course of action laid out in the process book for that would be 7 people. Had to handle it, from the originator to the person that wrote the purchase order. 7, and we had 33 people handling it. Again, questioning why we're doing these things. By people becoming involved in paperwork. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, It's all extremely important if we're going to attack the cost structure that builds up to the total cost of our products, and that's a competitive price we have to deal with in the market. Things like that do not come about through a management activity. It comes about through people being involved in participating in their jobs with an interest to see that the company succeeds. And believe me, we will not succeed in industry without that kind of dedication. But the whole process starts with the manager of the company, his staff, and convincing this whole structure that you have in there that the people in the operation must have a voice in what's happening. Any questions on areas I could touch on for you? Mr. Wilson?
Claude, two questions. First of all, is this program unique or relatively unique among GM plants, unique to the Muncie plant? Second question is, how do these EPGs work? Who's in them? How often do they meet? How do you encourage ideas? How do they work?
I can't say that it's universal in General Motors. I know, in fact, that it is not. I do believe that we are probably out in the vanguard of the plants in General Motors that are working on this. We've had a number of people that have come in to try to find out what we're doing and how we're doing it. We had a visitation from the Allison gas turbine plant this last week. And they came in and absolutely could not believe that we had a zero defect program. That if a part did not conform to the print specifications, that we threw it away. And we had parts there that were 25 millionths out of print, and they were being scrapped, and that absolutely dumbfounded them. They say, well, you know, Deming talks about, or Duran talks about fitness for use, you know. Well, I don't believe in fitness for use. I really don't. Now, I did once. But I don't any longer, because as we put in SPC back in 81, fall of 81, we started with it. And as we started working with the assembly plants to find out the things that cause transmissions to be pulled from the vehicles, as we started working with our customers, we found that by closing off those defects, that our warranty got sharply better. Now, we've always been, and we are today, the lowest warranty manufacturer in General Motors for transmissions, whether it's Hydromatic or purchased from outside or whoever it is. But through the last 4 years, as we have started to get SPC fully implemented, which it has been for a couple of years now, as we have gotten people involved in the quality aspects of the job, our warranty has dropped, in some cases, 70% from where it was 5 years ago. And at that time, we were still the lowest warranty producer in the business. We have jobs running today with test stand rejects less than 1% for a total transmission. Now, if we can move to guarantee that every piece of material coming into that operation is within print, and the assembly operators put it together without a failure, now you're moving towards a point where you don't have to test that product any longer. And that's a very significant part of the cost of production. And we're moving in that direction, Alan. Now, 25 millionths, you know, is something that really boggles my mind, and I'm sure it does yours, you know. I used to run a gauge department in the plant in Cleveland. And if we were going to check something within 2 or 3 thousandths, we soaked it at constant temperature for 24 hours in a regular gauge laboratory and then checked it. And we're doing it now in production on a basis like that with electronic gauges. So now we're dealing with constant temperature coolant in the machines. And you soak the part in baths of constant temperature controlled coolant, so that when you gauge them, they're all the same temperature. But we're doing it at hundreds of pieces a day, thousands of pieces a day. But that's a kind of quality that we have to get to in this country across the board if we're going to survive. What was the second part of your question, Alan? I'm sorry.
Exactly how do they...
Well, how the people get involved?
Yes.
So far, it's been 100% voluntary basis. To that extent, then, we have people who do not want to participate. They are the outsiders, and you may have one out of a group of 7 or one out of a group of 10. And we've got right now about 50% participation in the operation, and probably 40% salary people involved. There are complete salary groups, and a number of the supervisors and general supervisors are part of an hourly group. Well, what we're going to do is, and this is kind of in a development stage, but it's been recommended to us by the EPG groups that we cause everyone to attend, but they don't have to participate if they don't want to. But they can come in and sit and listen. Okay? So there's a little difference in that. You've got to go, but you don't have to participate. Now, the hope is that human nature being what it is, when they hear a discussion going on that may involve part of their job, that they're going to start to say something about it. And perhaps eventually start to get into the cycle. Because it's really important that the mavericks get involved. Because those mavericks usually got that way because we did something to them at some time in the past, and they just withdrew. And if we've changed and truly changed, then we've got to try to find some way to get them back into business. But I have seldom found a person who was a maverick in the plant that was not made that way by some function of management at some time. Very typical case in Cleveland. We had a fellow there, he absolutely would not talk to a member of management, would not say anything to him, would listen if he was given an order, would not respond, but he would do what he had to do. We had him up in a meeting one time because we were talking about fixing up their department. It was really a pit. Oil on the floor, wood blocks were all chewed up, very poor material handling. They told us we wear out our scrap by dragging it around the floor. Things like that. And it was true. One of the things that we wanted to do was to put in a new parquet wood floor, and they were big blocks of hardwood. And they were pretty chewed up. And we said, gee, we really don't have money to buy these new parquet blocks. And this fellow got up and said, well, you dummies, why don't you turn the block over? It's good on the back side. Yeah, it is. So we turned the blocks over and had a brand new floor. And all it cost us was a labor to turn it over. And that fellow turned over. And he came up one day and he said, this really isn't such a bad place to work anymore. I really enjoy coming to work. But it was our problem, it wasn't his. So we've got to get people to start talking, communicating, and I think they'll start to participate then. Anything else? Sir?
My name's Steve Mock. I was in your plant in 1970 on an assembly operation. Mm-hmm. And I know it's hourly. I've worked under a piecework system too. So I've had a lot of exposure to both ways, and a lot of the climate they generate and the productivity changes. Mm-hmm. I know there's a relationship to quality there too. How do you feel about those two? I know you're still hourly at this point, mm-hmm. and in some places that are piecework, there's a force to go hourly. You think it's possible to have a quality environment with a piecework system, or you think that's counterproductive?
My impression is that it's counterproductive. When you are going to compensate someone on the basis of the number of pieces that they produce, and let's say there's a bonus level and he produces a base, and then over that base he gets so much for every piece he produces. His income then is based on net out the door. To him, it's gross out the door, okay? Everything he makes, he gets a piece on, or he gets paid on. If he is producing a marginal part, is he going to shut off that machine? Is he going to report that he's doing that, or is he going to push the material on down the line? I've seen it happen where they just move the material down. I know it happens in some of the plants. It does not happen in our plant. Our people are free to shut their machines off if they're not making them to print. And they get involved with the foreman and they come over and discuss what they have to do with it. And if it means shutting the machine off and repairing it, it may be down for 2 or 3 days and you find another job for this fellow. We have shut down the assembly lines because we were not capable of making parts to print. I've shut down assembly plants because we couldn't make the parts to print due to a heat treat distortion problem. And I got a call from a group executive, vice president, that congratulated us for shutting off their assembly line because we shut down for a quality problem. And that's the kind of dedication you're finding in industry today. Now, when you were working there, if we had shut down an assembly plant because of a quality problem, I would have got a call, but it would have been a completely different kind of call. I can guarantee you that. But that's a dedication, and I really don't believe that you can compensate people for the number of pieces that they produce and get the type of quality dedication that you want. Because it should not make any difference to them. If your equipment can't make it to print, it should not affect his paycheck. And I think that's, what you're going to have.
Any other questions? How about you up in Kokomo?
They went to sleep, I think.
No, they never go to sleep up there, I'll tell you that. Claude, you were one of the early practitioners of participative management, and as I remember, it was because of Theory Z, is that correct?
That's right.
And you still believe in Theory Z, is that true?
Absolutely.
And the reason I wanted to bring that out, because as you know, I teach Theory Z in all my classes as the beginning of participative management. It's just the beginning, though, it's not the end in itself. And I think would you comment a little bit on that?
Sure. I think Bill's Theory M was General Motors in his book. We had a couple of chances to talk with Bill and listen to him lecture, and we pinned him down to that one evening, and he said, well, if it sounded that familiar, maybe that's what it was. But Bill's whole theory, of course, he's trying to compare the Japanese culture to where we are, and their culture, of course, is quite different. There's a worker dedication over there to the success of the company, to the success of the institution, and to the success of the nation. Now, their quality ethic is not universal over there, okay? We've got to understand that. But where it's practiced in their industry and exploited in their industry, it's extremely effective. But there's a number of Japanese industries that are not this glowing type of participative management, everyone succeeds type activity. And as you get farther down in the supplier chain, you run into that. Some of the mom and pop shops that they have running over there are not too different than the sweatshops that you might imagine from years ago. And if they are not able to keep up with the cost demands imposed on them by the companies that they supply, they're replaced by other ones. So you've got a real dichotomy going on over there. But the whole system is a beginning that Bill's talking about. It's a real learning process. It's a developing process. And, if we're going to truly reduce our costs, we've got to be able to reduce the dedication level of our supervision. We have got to be able to do far more with much less. Their plants over there run with maybe 2 or 3 levels of supervision from the managing director down. And we have 7 or 8. So we've got to gradually withdraw some of this activity, but we've got to find other areas for these management people to work in. Now, whether that's sales, or whether that's customer contacts, or whatever it is, we're moving in that direction. And we've got people who used to be engineers, that used to be supervisors, that are going out making contacts to our customers. It's a function that we desperately need. But rather than hire someone new, we took someone out of the operation that existed today and have put them in that. Now that, again, is not universal. We've talked with some of the plants in industry and General Motors, and suggested that there was an aspect of the business we hadn't been looking at, so they wanted to go out and hire 50 people to do this. And, that boggled my mind. We were one of our operations this last week. They sell 30,000 units a year. They've got 1,000 engineers. 1,000 engineers. Now, that's not the process staff. They got 300 process staff. Absolutely ridiculous to have that kind of a dedication in there. They say, well, they make a lot of different varieties. Well, so what? We can't afford as an industry to have that kind of dedication and overhead. The amount of labor that we're putting into one of our new transmissions costs us $12. That's what we pay in wages to make that, $12. The transmission going out the door is going to cost us over $450. Now think about that a minute. The actual people involved in making this thing, it's infinitesimal what their cost is. The material is the major part of it, and beyond that is the burden and super burden that we're paying for all this engineering staff, all the salespeople, the marketing people, and all that kind of activity. And that's where we're getting killed in the industry today. That's what's doing it, because the Japanese don't have that level of super burden that they're working with. And the more we're able to get this participative management down on the floor and be able to thin out this level and hierarchy we've got, the better off we're going to be, because that's non-productive. For the most part, that is non-productive. So
I don't even say it's counterproductive.
It's not, well, yes.
Bill, as I recall, you were one of the first, if not the first, with your participative management at the office level. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that about 40% of your office people have bought on now.
Yeah, they're working towards that. Yeah.
What do you see for the future on that?
Well, we're trying to, what we're trying to do, and it's something you can't go tell them to do, all right? Mm-hmm. But what we're trying to do is to get those people in the office kind of out of their office groups and to spread them out into and interact with the people in the plant. For instance, we used to have a staff meeting at 8:30 every day, and it lasted about a half an hour. So we talked about what's important for the day, and then we went back to our respective operations. Well, what I've asked the fellows to do now is that every Monday the entire staff go out and circulate in the plant and shake hands and talk to production operators or material handlers or whoever it happens to be, and to tell them a little bit about what's going on in the plant and ask them what kind of problems they are experiencing. Now that brings that hourly person in direct contact with a staff head, and it might be a personnel department or the purchasing department or engineering or plant doctor, whoever. And that's made a tremendous impact on bringing information to us about just what do they fear out there. The rumor mills are tremendous things. And the only way you're going to beat a rumor mill is to have direct communication with those folks out there and to gain the trust in the operation, because trust is really what you're going to build on, not suspicion and not, any of the old activities we used to have. We meet then on Wednesdays with the entire staff meets with an EPG group every week. And we sit down and listen to what they have done and the things that are bothering them. And we've had some pretty tough meetings with those folks, because they feel free enough now that they'll come right out and tell you what they're thinking. And if you don't like it, you better be prepared to sit there and listen to it. But we've had some pretty frank discussions about foremen not participating, being roadblocks, things they want to do that are not being accomplished. Why aren't they being accomplished? They're faced with problems trying to implement their ideas that they just shouldn't. We had one of them come in there, the tinner shop, and they said, we wanted to get some new lights in. And what they did is they strung a diagonal line from one column to another and put 2 fluorescent fixtures on it and said, that's good enough for what you need. When just 50 feet away, there's a storage space. Now, mind, it's a storage space. It's got lighting at least as good as I'm standing under right here, being used for nothing but storage. And these guys came in and said, we're doing precision layout work. Why can't we work over there in the storage area and put the storage over where the poor lighting is? That's what we're going to do, But it's been that way for 6 months. Only none of us really looked at it from our standpoint, but from their standpoint, it was a real thorn in their side, and rightly so. So we're moving those folks over, So, Bill's right on target. We've got to wake up in management.
Claude, you've spoken about OT and about the Japanese. I know you've been spending a great deal of time in West Germany. Are the Germans coming around, or are they getting ahead of the Japanese, or how do you look at the German situation today?
Well, it's a third culture you're looking at. Discussing the Japanese and ourselves. From what I've seen in the German industry, by and large, it's a regimented society. And they don't have, for the most part, participative management over there. They have an excellent level of dedication in their employees to the job and the company. They have a great deal of respect for the people they work for, therefore they'll do whatever they're asked to do. Their equipment technology is far beyond the United States, I'm sorry to say. I know Ken talked about some of the equipment that they're buying. We have an association with the Getrag company in West Germany that makes transmissions for BMW and Mercedes, Porsche, Jaguar, Opel. And they're designing 3 of the transmissions that we're working on right now. So we've done a lot of work with that firm. When we were going out to buy machinery, we, of course, knew what was in the U.S. market. We'd been looking at it for quite some time, and we went to Germany and looked at the equipment that was in the Getrag plant. And then went to the German machine tool builders, and they are, without question, industry leaders in the machinery. And I'd say West German, there's Swiss involved, and so on. We have turning lathes now, like the old Detroits that you may be familiar with. They're made by the Fisher Company. Now, Fisher made some lathes back in the early 50s that were a piece of junk. But they have gone into full CNC controlled equipment. The beds of the lathes are filled with reinforced concrete, and they sit on 3 pads. There's absolutely no vibration, no deviation in those machines. We ran a full quality control test on that. We changed tools in the middle of this test. Now, normally when you change a tool, when you're running a quality control cycle, you establish a new universe of parts because the size physically changes. You could not tell where we changed the tool. The total deviation, plus or minus 3 sigma, was 25% of the allowed process tolerance. Absolutely fantastic, and that included the tool change. The hobbing machines that we're buying produce better leads today than we can shave in a shaving machine. Absolutely. And beyond that, we're going into total hard gear finishing after heat treat.
The red liners will be out then.
Sure, you don't need red liners. You don't even have to run the gear lab, on that. Well, you do to test, but one of the hardest things to do today is to produce a gear involute and lead consistently because of deviations you get in your steel, just through the stress that's left in the steel, and how it responds going through the heat treat processes. So now with these hard gear finishers, we reform the entire tooth and the lead, and we're running gear sound data that's ranging 9s and 10s on our scale, and 10 you can't hear. So the German industry is different from the cultural standpoint, not participative management, but very loyal to the company, do what they want, work hard, good ethic. Technology-wise, they're super.
They're still number one.
Oh, yeah.
Any other questions?
Everybody wants to go.
On behalf of the class, again, with the high output management, Andy Grove, you are in the high output as well as in the quality and JIT and Kanban and participative management, and I know how sold you are on it. Again, thank you for the class and everyone else. I sure appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming. We'll take a 5-minute break, and come back for the close-up. Thank you.